So for day 28 of scientific well-being, we're out in the hammock, and I wanted to explore the probability field around what I think is one of the most important things, and that is look around you today and look at what you consider to be the most important advances in technology, in I would really say technology, because architecture, computers, clothing, communication. Sorry, I've got mild allergies. Are all technology. And if you look at what is affecting your life or what you're most enamored with, just take a moment to think. For me, it's this hammock. It's this phone. It's this tripod. It's the conversation I just had on Skype with my girlfriend. And none of this existed 100 years ago. This hammock, it's made from nylon tent fabric that didn't exist 100 years ago. This tripod is made from aluminum, lightweight aluminum and plastics that did not exist 100 years ago. The camera has not even existed in the last 30 years. The phone and the camera 30 years ago did not exist. There's very little that is having significant impact on our lives that did exist more than 100 years ago. Cotton existed 100 years ago, not this particular shirt, but cotton did. Jewelry existed 100 years ago, though not this particular ring. And then the next question is, what is the source? Where does all this stuff come from? And you could say Mother Nature. It all comes from the earth. But by a circuitous route. Where did we come from? We all came from the earth. To believe scientific reductionist materialists, we are nothing but random mutations from this earth. Which means that all of this came from the earth. So you could say that the earth is having a very complex relationship with itself. This hammock bit of earth is relating to this shirt bit of earth, relating to this skin bit of earth, relating to this idea, talking to this bit. So you could say that the earth is in a complex conversation with itself. And we are the Earth's greatest creators of variation and novelty. Because if you look what the chimpanzees or what the dolphins or what the rats or what the raccoons or what the birds have been up to in the last 500 years, the amount of new creations in terms of physical objects that are populating the planet today as a result of all of them combined. In fact, if you take the entire species of the planet, from ants to monkeys to birds to bats to mosquitoes, and look at every new and innovative creation that they have all created in the last 500 years, and you compare that to all the movies, all the video games, all the cars, all the buildings, all the fabrics, all the roads, all the cameras, all the phones, that these bodies of nature, these human natures, have created over the last 500 years, there is a possible case, particularly if you count the new invention relative to counting every bit of sand organized in an anthill, which has been going on for thousands of years. But if you look at novelty and what's new, you could say that human beings excuse me, more allergies. You could say that human beings are the biggest creation within the natural realm of novelty. And that and that in terms of human well-being, it is not to ants or mosquitoes, etc., directly that we would look for advances in well-being, but rather to consciousness. Because why is it that human beings have, in 1 year, created more than 200 new models of cell phones, whereas the chimpanzees don't have one? Why? Why have human beings created more novelty as this unique expression of nature than all the other species combined? And the answer, take a moment to think what you think. Like, all we have here is you and me. I have an idea. And where did that idea come from? Like, I just got out of bed, and here's this idea. Where did it come from? Where's your idea coming from? If you're drawing a blank, where's that blank coming from? I'm just fishing around for the last vestiges of a very delicious coconut dipped macaroon. And while you consider where all that came from, I'm going to have my Nespresso. Nespresso needs to be drunk when it's hotter than this. It just tastes something about the heat and bitterness combined. But Nespresso machines only occurred in the last 100 years. It's only in the last 100 years where I could take a little cup, stick it in a tray, and press a button. Electricity in the last 100 years. I mean, there's so much. And where's that coming from? Now, science, for all of its many accomplishments, has not been able to locate definitively or explain consciousness in the brain. But where do you think all of these ideas are coming from? Why? What makes us so different from an ant? I mean, an ant can do some pretty amazing things. You cannot climb up a skyscraper that's literally 1,000 times taller than you can. Climb out on this limb that is literally a mile high. Eat your way through a giant leaf and carry a leaf that's 3 times heavier than you can on your back down the skyscraper, and then march single file for more than 1,000 miles in a single day and drop 800 feet without getting damaged. I mean, you cannot do that. An ant can. I mean, there's lots of things an ant can do. There are lots of things a mosquito can do. There's lots of things a flea. I mean, you cannot jump 800 feet in the air. A flea can. Relative to its body mass, fleas have these enormous jumping powers. And so you can't do any of that. But you can do this one thing. You can create novelty at a level that is perhaps more than 1,000 times more than a flea or a mosquito or a chimpanzee. And it's not overall because your body is that strong. We use our, I mean, I'm just laying here in a hammock, but I'm creating something new here, using very little of my body. Now, the reductionist scientists would say that this is all completely random. It's completely random that we have language. It's completely random that we have consciousness. That if the universe was recreated all over again from scratch, that there absolutely would be a you and a me at this point, talking about this on a phone 4 billion years into the future. Now, the scientists will say that, but if you bring that scientist into the room and you say, "Scientist, so you know all this was going to be created, right?" Well, how did you know that? Because that was programmed into the future. So how do you know that you know if that was all programmed in the future? Your thoughts are just random. So your thoughts randomly say that it's this, and my thoughts randomly disagree with you, and that was all pre-programmed. But who knows whether or not I will open my finger? Is there a single scientific device that knows? What am I going to do? Am I going to open my finger? Maybe, maybe not. The scientists will say it's random, but it's predestined. It's meaningless, but has no destiny. And yet, that very thought, that very bit of conscious deduction on the part of many rationalist materialist scientists is precisely what has led to some part of me rebelling against that. So what am I going to do? Of course, to have it be fully scientific, we can't have scientists making stuff up and pretending, this and that and the other. So they've got to write their answer down. They've got to write it down. We've got to have 10 scientists all write down and use whatever devices they do. They've got to get a circle of the 10 most important scientists. And what's going to happen? Will my finger open or close? And they've all got to write their answers down, and then we've got to look at it scientifically. So what was the basis upon one saying yes and the other one saying no? And was that all completely meaningless? Or is the scientist completely irrelevant? In other words, we shouldn't be paying attention to these irrelevant scientists whatsoever because it's all predestined, it's all material, and their consciousness is an illusion. So why should we waste our time reading their illusionary thoughts? But of course, every scientist has a secret. Their illusionary, predetermined thoughts are more important in their mind than anyone else's. But of course, that also was predictable, and meaningless. So why do we care? And who knows whether or not I will open my finger. So this is kind of the state that we're in right now with our science, because the truth is that consciousness does not easily fit in to science's box. Science was born among consciousness's many, many variants, among the many creations of human consciousness. We have science, which can best be reduced to a mastery of names, measurements, and numbers. That science is the mastery of names, measurements, and numbers. The mastery of distinction with precision. Distinction. This is CMYK green, expressed in a decimal point compared to another kind of green. This is a nose that is exactly 1.2 inches wide. This is a nose hole that is exactly 0.3 centimeters wide and X centimeters deep. We just sit and measure things. We name them, nose, hole. And then we create corollaries. We create relationships. And I'm building up here to what I've been up to for my last, for this day, which I got a head start on yesterday. But going back to the things that are in your environment, you look around you, how much of what is around you was created in the last 500 years? And where does it all boil down to? And I'd suggest it boils down to human consciousness. That human consciousness is the source, meaning the doorway, not necessarily the source, but the doorway, that every single thing around us. Now, this extends even to the natural environment. I'm in Northern California. Go figure. And 500 years ago, these would have been giant redwoods. Looking around us, this sky would not exist, because in this exact location, giant redwoods. But there are not giant redwoods here. There are bay trees. There's a plum tree. There's a small redwood. There's a Kefir lime tree from Thailand that I brought over, so I could cook Yeng Kiawan, or green curry, with fresh Thai herbs, Kefir lime leaves. Very good in an omelette also. Who ever heard of an omelette with minced Kefir lime leaves? I don't know, but I thought it would be a good idea. Consciousness that we all have is the source of so much in our environment. Now, the trouble with the attitude, like what do you see as the problem with modern science? Like, first of all, we have to understand consciousness invented modern science in the last 500 years. Well, not entirely, but 500 years ago, you would not have scientists strutting around believing that everything that doesn't fit in their test tubes doesn't exist or has no value. An interesting story along those lines, René Descartes, one of the founders of modern science, was visited by an angel who said that nature will be mastered with the use of measurement and numbers, and kind of charged Descartes with a mission of inventing modern science. Now, where did the angel come from? Was it random chance? Was it just imagination? You see, it doesn't matter. Science was born from consciousness. But science is performing an act of patricide, which is not too uncommon among human beings who have difficult relationships with their parents, by turning around and denying all meaning, all existence, all love for its source. An act of patricide. The destruction of the source, the destruction of the parent, the destruction of the host planet. This is particularly common in trauma. We are a traumatized species. So we're in a very fragile relationship with our sense of selves and global and national identity. Some of our favorite movies are the brave warrior fighting with the nature savage. Savage nature and winning. We love that kind of stuff. The ego securing its identity. Now, when science says that because we can't explain consciousness, and because everything is physical and consciousness doesn't appear to be, therefore it doesn't exist, it's just an illusion. It means So it's like, who invented that idea that spitting is so disgusting? We did. Consciousness came up with that one too. And I think that's a terrible creation because when there's a bunch of itchy phlegm, there's nothing that feels better than to get it out. But that's just common sense and natural. But then we have this thing that says, that's terrible, that's disgusting, don't do that. Says who? It's an idea. And someone came up with that idea and managed to get it popularized. So now we just go along with it. So given that just about every single thing that I'm seeing, from the grade of the hill to the species of tree, to the shape of my house, to the plants that I've planted, to the plants that other people have planted, to the ring, to the fabric, the color of my skin, the phone, the hammock, the chair, since every single one of these objects has come through the doorway of consciousness, and since we, as a scientific, loving culture, cannot explain consciousness, but that consciousness, one could say, I think relatively realistically, that consciousness will single-handedly determine whether or not we live or die as a species, whether other species live or die, that the quality, the shape, the nature, and the values of our human consciousness will determine more than anything else whether we live or die. Who else in all the species lives or dies? The nature of the Earth environment, whether we go interplanetary or not. Human consciousness. What is the single most important thing we need to be looking at? The study of human consciousness. What kind of consciousness is going to grow in well-being, love, harmony, etc., and what kind of consciousness is going to destroy itself in a matter of decades? What is the nature of that consciousness? And we have neuroscience, we have a very important study, we have neuroscience, we have pharmacology, but some of the pioneers on the edge of consciousness are exploring not drugs such as cocaine and heroin and stuff that are highly toxic and addictive and that just make you feel important for an hour or feel a rush that then subsides, but psychedelics, psilocybin, DMT, 5-MeO DMT, these are all things that are actually exist within the human body, and that when people have near-death experiences, when people have transcendent meditative experiences, the pineal gland actually produces and releases these chemicals to facilitate consciousness having these beautiful experiences. Now, because our governments have banned these things, and because science hasn't uttered a peep, back in the early days of scientists were really fighting for their right to explore and discover. But there's been very little gallantry and heroism when it comes to scientists fighting to discover consciousness, in part because they don't know what it is. I mean, they're not confident in their success. But we need more than ever before, and fast, to study consciousness. And because science has been banned from many of these psychedelic studies by the stupidity of our government, I mean, literally, it is profoundly stupid to take substances that have been around on the planet for more than 1 million years and say that these you cannot study. You cannot study these things. So the problem with that, of course, is that if you can't study them and learn how they work, we are a curious species. We're all scientists to some degree. And so the fringe, the minority, the bold minority that has begun every social meme in history is always exploring the next new thing. But they're not doing it with safety. And so I believe that the study of human consciousness is the single most important study that can lead to greater human and ecological well-being, number one. I believe that science needs to be studying consciousness in all of its many faces, and amongst the most reliable doorways into consciousness is mind-altering substances that literally change the way we think and feel for predictable periods of time, and which may give us glimpses into how and why we as a species have out-created more things than any other species combined. So for my day, on this day, I spent 3 hours listing every danger that I've been able to read about and discover around psychedelics, every danger. Listed what the danger is, why it's dangerous, and 2, listed a way to reduce that danger with a goal of making psychedelics safer so that we can begin a more rational and scientific study of how it is that we as a species can give birth to 1 billion times more creative and novel thing than any other species on the planet in a way that appears to be directly linked to our consciousness. To our consciousness differentiated from every other species on the planet. So that's my project. Thanks for watching.